Hello and welcome to the next in our series of Employment Law Group webinars. Thank you very much for joining me either live or using our Listen Again facility. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Emma O'Connor. I'm a Senior Associate within the Employment team and I'm also Head of the Training Academy. And for those of you who can stay around till the end of the webinar, I'm going to share with you some really exciting opportunities for training, particularly for your managers in this remote working time. So to today's topic, for many businesses, the recent months have seemed impossible, with many businesses balancing lots of different competing needs and grappling with really complicated government guidance, often rushed and received at the 11th hour. For many, the job retention scheme and furlough leave have been a lifeline. However, as the scheme begins to wind down, many employers are now turning their attention to what they should do next and asking the question, how do we unfurlough the furloughed? Of course, there are other things to consider. Many employees have been away from the business for many months, some up to 6 months, and how will they readjust? And certainly the workplace that they will be returning to will be different to the one that they left. Some employers are looking at their terms and conditions of employment, as well as looking at whether there is indeed a role for somebody to return to. Today is an overview discussion where I'll be looking at some general themes and general principles, and it's not intended to be a substitute for taking specific legal advice. I thought before we start, it might be interesting to look at some statistics about what other countries are doing and how their governments are supporting their workforces. And I saw this in the Sunday Times on the 9th of August, and I wanted to share it with you. And I think it's quite interesting to see what other countries are doing. And as at the 9th of August, as we can see the workforce in New Zealand, the percentage there, they are supporting more of their employees. And when we look at the UK and Germany, roughly the same amount of employees are in receipt of government support when compared against the total workforce. Looking at the UK and statistics published from HMRC, between the 2nd of August and the 16th of August, the number of employees who are on furlough leave remained unchanged at 9.6 million. And also the current cost of the scheme is estimated to be 35.4 billion. And I did check this morning, those figures have not been updated, but it's going to be interesting to see as we move, particularly from the 1st of September, to see if those numbers have been reduced and by how much. So we know that the job retention scheme is going to end on the 31st of October. And until then, obviously there's going to be a decrease in the amount of contribution received from the government, and obviously an increase there in the percentage that employers will have to pay. And it's going to be interesting as well, seeing how many employees are returning to work, how many employers are using the flexible furlough scheme, and again, what's going to happen as we move towards the end of October. So when we think about the challenges of unfurloughing our staff, let's now have a look at what some of those issues might be. Well, I think the main one is really going to be how, on a practical level, are we going to get staff back to work? And I think really here, certainly in most of what I'm going to talk about today is really around messaging, it's around clarity of message, and also around planning. And that's going to play a really big part in this. A lot of the messages will come centrally, but also our managers and our management population is going to play a big part in making sure that messages are clear and that they are disseminated down amongst their teams. So we need to think about how people are going to return from furlough, how much notice are individuals going to receive to return to work. And here we need to think about what's reasonable, but also going back to that furlough letter that we issued perhaps back in March, and what does it say in there about how much notice we can give individuals. So do check those letters and do check the terms. Employers are being encouraged to return their people back to work on staggered hours and flexible hours, and looking at staggering breaks. So, again, think about that. Think about how employees are going to actually get to work. Are we going to allow them to drive? Are we going to make provision for cycling? Many businesses, as I've said, are taking advantage of flexible furlough, which again runs until the end of October. And this does allow employers to bring employees back on a staggered basis, on a rota system, and again, paying employees for the actual hours that they work, but then still being able to access the grant for the hours that are not worked. And the rules for this are quite complicated, particularly where you've got individuals who are on variable hours or variable pay, but particularly those in the leisure and hospitality sector are using flexible furlough as they see demand fluctuate for their services. So when we think about the practicalities, we need to think obviously about whether these changes could be a temporary or a permanent change to the contract of employment, particularly if we're changing pay or we're looking at changing hours. So think about how this is going to be managed. Is this a temporary change or a permanent change? And remember that rules with regards to consultation and changing contracts still apply. And if we are changing terms and it is a formal alternative to redundancy, then again, we need to be alert there to potential numbers and whether in fact the collective consultation obligations are triggered. So something to be aware of there and to take advice on. We need to think about how we can bring people back and the numbers of people that we can bring back to ensure that we maintain those social distancing rules. So again, this is where flexible furlough can assist and rotating staff. If staff are to be taken off of furlough but remain at home, working from home, then there are health and safety and risk assessment issues for home workers. So again, think about how we're going to ensure that we comply with those. But also there are practical considerations with people working at home. So thinking about equipment, thinking about data protection, thinking about security, and also about staff training. So issues there with people working from home and returning to work and working from home. Although people are no longer being officially told to shield, certainly at the moment, there are health considerations which will need to be taken into account. And from a health perspective, can individuals return? Should they return? If they can't return, what should businesses do? And I'm going to talk about health and safety considerations in a moment. And also, who are we going to bring back to work? What numbers, as I've said, what capacity? So is there a way to ask for volunteers to return? Remembering, of course, that when we select those individuals to return, we have to remember to do so in a fair and non-discriminatory way. As well as the mechanics and obviously the practicalities of returning people to work, there are key health and safety and also wellbeing issues to consider. We know that there are new COVID-19 health and safety rules, there are new risk assessments that have to be undertaken, and there's also new guidance for certain sectors as well as more generally. So again, ensure that you are up to date with what the current laws are. And remember too that the COVID regulations, if you like, sit on top of our obligations with regards to health and safety more generally. They're not, they sit above it. They don't replace it. So again, we have to think about all the other issues about returning to work and what that might look like as well. I've put up here the COVID risk assessments, and again, if possible, employers should publish the results of their risk assessments on their website, and certainly the government is expecting all businesses with over 50 employees to do this. And there should be some consultation there with the risk assessments with any trade union or health and safety representatives to ensure you've got that joined up approach. Dust off your health and safety policies as well. Do these need to be updated in light of COVID? And again, ensure that your policies, whether they are COVID specific or general health and safety, do ensure that these are communicated to your workforce, as well as explaining what the rules are and what the consequences might be if those rules are breached. I think it's really important that employees understand the rules and also understand the consequences. So a big messaging around that issue as well. As I've said, we mustn't forget about our workers at home. So again, ensuring that we remember our risk assessments, our display screen equipment obligations there as well. I think we need to think about, obviously, what reassurances that we can give our people. And I think it's one really where, as I've said, our policies and our procedures are going to be key here in how we can ensure that those messages are disseminated. And again, your managers will play a big part here. We need to think about training as well, don't we, for our managers, for our people, about the new way of working, again, to ensure that we can then show that if those rules are breached and if that training has not been followed, that then we've got the opportunity there to discipline if needs be. There's some businesses out there we might need to think about PPE and whether that's relevant as well. So really think about that, developing that communication plan across the workforce, your managers again being key to that, and think about whether you need to have a working party. Some things I've seen that have worked really well are videos, so people taking videos of the workplace and sharing that on the workplace intranet, just to explain to people what the new rules are in terms of exiting and entering your workplace. So there are some really good ways and positive ways that we can reassure our people that it is safe to return to work. But of course, we do have those individuals that are feeling very reluctant about returning to the workplace. And remember that this is an incredibly worrying time for your workforce, and many will be feeling anxious about travelling to work and perhaps being at work as well. If you have an employee assistance programme, then I would advise that you tell people about this and also explain where people can go if they need help and further support. Many may have concerns about their own safety. Many may be concerned about their own health or those of a member of their household, particularly if they have a medical condition or if they are vulnerable. So again, employers need to be mindful of employees' concerns and do encourage your people to come forward and raise their concerns and worries, but do so in a confidential way, but also in a timely way. It's best to deal with these issues so we know that we have to take steps. And I think here the manager's role is going to be key. For those of you who've listened to my webinars before or attended my training programs, I'm really hot on your managers knowing their teams, because if issues arise, they can deal with those issues quickly so we don't let issues fester. Where an employee does have a health condition that makes them more vulnerable, they may be disabled within the meaning of the Equality Act. So again, it's really important that employers know this, that they can take appropriate advice, be that through occupational health or taking advice from clinicians, and thinking there about the obligation to make reasonable adjustments to roles. This might be that adaptations need to be made, or an individual may have to continue working from home. So again, think about that. We might well see an increase in the number of flexible working requests, including those from those who have obligations to care for children. And I know from my own experience that people relied on after school care. Some schools are not offering that now. Many relied on grandparents or other relatives who again are not in a position to help them. So you might find that you get very specific requests from employees to cover certain parts of the day. So think about how as an organisation you're going to manage those requests to avoid grievances or claims. And although schools have returned and childcare settings have reopened, many may not remain open. So we have to think about local school closures, local lockdowns again. How are we going to respond to that as employers when we get requests from employees that need to flex their work because their children are now at home? So again, what's the practicalities of this? How are we going to handle those requests? Are we going to ask staff to take holiday? Are we going to look at our policies around emergency leave, so that right to take time off in certain situations, but that leave is unpaid? So again, how are we going to communicate with our staff, particularly around those uncertainties. And for those who are anxious, as I've said, try and understand their concerns. Use your employee assistance programs, and your line managers, as I've said, are going to be a really important bridge between furlough and work, or home and the office. So again, think about how your managers make sure they're giving the right messages, they're giving the clear messages. And unfortunately, if employees do refuse to return to work, and that refusal is unreasonable. So we need to think about how, as an organisation, we're going to deal with that. So think about how we're going to communicate with our people that don't want to return, and I'm going to talk about some of the legal issues with that. But from a practical perspective, how are we going to deal with that as an organisation? Now, if an employee does unreasonably refuse to attend, despite the employer's best efforts and complying with all the obligations with regards to health and safety, to ensuring that there isn't another underlying concern that we've not dealt with, then essentially if an employee does refuse to return, then it is failing to follow a lawful and reasonable management request. And whilst I'm not suggesting at all that we start disciplining our people, I do think it's important that as a business we decide and think about the implications of people refusing to return to work, and actually how we are going to manage that as an organisation, because it's far better to have careful handling of situations rather than wading in with disciplinary action. It's going to be far better in the long run in terms of employee engagement, retaining staff, and we want to avoid complaints and claims, particularly at this time. So I've mentioned about disability, discrimination, and again, we need to be aware of obligations with that. We need to know our people. We need to understand what health implications people have. We need to think about whether making somebody return to work puts them at a disadvantage unfairly. How are employers going to justify a return to work? Do we need to think about reasonable adjustments? Do we need to take advice from occupational health, from clinicians? Also, if we demand people return to the office and maybe they have other obligations, particularly childcare, again, how is this going to impact on the workforce? Again, a certain individuals being placed at an unfair disadvantage because of those obligations. So again, think about how we're going to manage that and where we need to take specific advice. And again, thinking about the risks. There's also specific protection where an employee does not feel safe to return. In such circumstances, they can tell you as their employer that they think that if they return to work, it's going to put their health at serious and imminent risk. So they're going to be a serious and imminent risk or danger to their health and safety. And employees have rights under the Employment Rights Act. You might have heard or read about Section 44 and Section 100. And again, there are similar rights under those sections where employees have been subjected to a detriment or a dismissal, or disciplinary action could be is a detriment. So we need to think about those detriments and where an employee has taken steps to protect themselves or other people to stop that serious and imminent risk from danger. So again, think about those legal risks, as well as risks under Section 44 and Section 100 of the Employment Rights Act. We then have to think about general rules of fairness and constructive unfair dismissal. So again, where employees feel that they have no alternative but to resign, and claim constructive dismissal where the actions of the employer have breached trust and confidence and breached that contract between employee and employer. There's also personal injury risks, negligent claims, and also other health and safety considerations that I've talked about. So again, think about how we can overcome those, what steps we can reasonably take to protect health and safety. Employees might also want to raise concerns about health and safety. So we have to remember our whistleblowing obligations, and employers must not dismiss or treat anybody less favourably because they have raised a concern. and this is obviously protection of the Employment Rights Act, but obviously under whistleblowing legislation as well. So think about having that process for being able to recognise and then deal with concerns in a timely way, in a confidential way, but also in a meaningful way. And that's really important, that individuals feel that they can raise concerns and that they know that those concerns will be treated in a meaningful way. So what advice can I give you in terms of how can we avoid some of these risks that I've talked about? Well, it's about having that open culture, isn't it? That culture where people can raise concerns. As I've said, they know those concerns will be treated seriously, that they can be made confidentially, but also they know that if there are steps that come out of it, that the employer will actually take steps to protect health and safety, to make those changes and make those changes quickly. Treat concerns sympathetically, and remember that everyone's lockdown experience has been different. I've described it as having lots of different plates spinning, some of them more successfully spun at various times of the day than others. If we do find that employees are refusing to come to work, or they're downing tools and saying, my health's at serious, I'm in serious and imminent risk of danger, then, take a breath. We might not dock pay immediately, so think about how we're going to react in those situations, because if we're starting to discipline people and treat them in a way that's unfair or detriment, then that can give rise to sort of separate claims as well. So I would say look before you leap in those types of situations. And we need to train managers on how to recognise complaints and what to do when they are received. Using occupational health, using clinicians, taking advice. Could we use medical suspensions? And often we use medical suspensions where we've got individuals who are pregnant. But in some situations where employees cannot return to work because of health and safety risks to them, then they could be entitled to receive up to 26 weeks of pay. So again, medical suspension might be something that we need to think about. Remembering to apply our sickness absence policies, our emergency leave policies, our sick pay policies fairly and consistently and in this non-discriminatory way. And again, think about flexible working. Are we going to allow employees to flex their day around their other commitments? Have we asked our people how they want to work? How many days they want to come into the office? Do they want to come into the office at all? But how then can we measure success and productivity? But there's also a human level to this as well. And employees have been away from the business for many months. And how will managers and the organisation reintegrate them back into the business, back into their teams, back into the world of work and back into routines? And for many managers, they've been managing maybe a 2-tier workforce, maybe even a 3-tier workforce. And I've been reading lots about how there's potential resentment within teams, within workplaces, particularly where you've had some individuals that have continued to work throughout furlough. Perhaps they've taken a pay cut, perhaps they've had to cut their hours, and then they see their colleagues who've been on furlough leave. Perhaps some may be earning more than them, even though they are working. Could there also be some resentment amongst those who have been furloughed, that they were furloughed? So it's going to be really interesting as we get people back from furlough leave, we start reintegrating. And I think it's going to be a real challenge for our leaders and managers as to how they can do this and do this successfully. Managing remote workforces, managing people who are coming into work, coming in on odd days. How can we get team meetings? How can we create that culture? How can we keep productivity? So leading and managing at this time is going to be really important. Now, my last webinar, I looked at changing terms and conditions of employment, but it's been a really tough time financially for organisations, and also for some of your people. And as we reintegrate employees back, they come off of furlough pay, they go back onto 100% of pay, their benefits start again, or maybe they won't. So again, during that transition period, what advice and support can we give our people? So maybe some thoughts there around financial well-being. What about holidays? Many furloughed employees, in fact, many employees in general, have not taken their holiday. And as well as being an organizational issue for employers. You know, is it really that we want people to come back to work and then immediately start taking holiday? So again, how can we do this on a practical level, but also from a health and safety perspective? Our people need to take holiday, they need to take some time away from their place of work. But how are we going to manage holiday? Because at the moment we might not want people coming back and then immediately taking 2 weeks off of work when we want to start getting them back into the business and start reopening. And obviously we're helped somewhat by the legislation that came out in March, which allowed 20 days, our basic holiday entitlement to 20 days to be carried forward for 2 holiday years, but only where employees and workers, because of course remember holiday is a worker right as well as an employee right, so where employees and workers have been unable to take holiday because of COVID. But how are we going to manage that additional holiday, that additional 1.6 weeks or any additional contractual holiday? Use it or lose it? Are we going to allow carryover? We can't pay in lieu except on termination. But do we want to designate holiday, for example, to ensure that staff are taking it? But remembering, if you are going to designate holiday, then employers, you need to give twice as much notice as the holiday you intend to be taken. So if you want 5 days holiday to be taken, you need to allow your people 10 days notice. What about pay? Are we going to look at changing terms and conditions of employment? You know, thinking about the webinar that I ran back in July. So, you know, essentially employers cannot impose unilateral changes on employees. To do that is a breach of contract, and employees are entitled to resign and claim constructive dismissal. But again, think about how we're going to consult about changes to pay and hours, for example. So is it going to be a permanent change? Is it a temporary change? If it's a temporary change, what are the triggers there? When are we going to review it? Don't promise too much. But again, if we are saying that we're going to review this on a monthly basis, then we need to do that, and we need to have a rationale for either not changing pay or changing it. So it's really important that, again, we think about the messaging there, but also think about, if we are making permanent changes to contract, that we can't do this unilaterally. We need consent to make those fundamental changes. Also, could a change to a contract of employment trigger our collective consultation obligations? So we need to be aware of that. And my message here would be, don't be complacent. I think that perhaps we're in a time where employers think they can change pay and they can change hours, and employees will just sign it, they'll just suck it up. And I think we just need to be aware that employees are bringing claims. The tribunal system is still operational. Our talent is still leaving, is still looking to move. So don't be complacent. We still have to follow the rules if we're wanting to make those changes to terms and conditions. But ultimately, we need to think about whether there is going to be a job to return to, despite the best efforts of businesses and using grants and the furlough scheme. So redundancies is a webinar in itself, so I would invite you to go back and check on our website for the webinar that I've run on this. But just to give you some headlines, you know, again, the devil of redundancy is in the planning detail. So who's affected? Are we going to have to pool individuals? Are positions unique? What are our numbers? Are we going to trigger collective consultation obligations? So if we're looking at 20 or more within 90 days at one establishment, again, we need to think about filling form HR1 to avoid criminal liability. We need to think about electing staff reps. We need to think about how long that process is going to be, remembering, of course, that in a collective redundancy situation, dismissals cannot take effect until after the consultation period has ended, and that's really important. We need to think about how our managers are going to manage this process. It might be a long time since they've handled a redundancy, so do we need some training for our managers as to how they're going to manage the process, as well as training for staff representatives in a collective redundancy consultation. We need to remember our individual redundancy processes, so fair reason, fair process. There has to be a legitimate reason why we are making redundancies. And we need to think about the financial and legal risks here. So unfair dismissal claims in a collective consultation situation. If you've not followed the rules, then employees can bring protective award claims for up to 13 weeks pay, and there is no length of service requirement for protective award claims. Similarly, with discrimination claims, they are a day one right. So we can't forget our legal obligations here. If you need help and advice on redundancies, because as I said, it's a webinar in itself, then do get in touch. So to bring things really to a close, and really looking at how I see things, talking to clients, talking to contacts, I think really at this time, employers and managers and HR need to keep themselves up to date. Keep yourselves up to date with health and safety rules, with the job retention scheme guidance, particularly as the scheme comes to an end and starts to taper off. Look at the rules with regards to flexible furlough, and again, there's been lots of stories at the moment about false claims. So again, make sure, go back, check your claims, because now is the time to really make any amendments that you need to do to avoid any later penalties. Keep records of those who are on furlough leave, if you're using flexible furlough as well. Keep records of all your calculations, and they need to be kept for 5 years. 5 years after the 31st of October, so keep those records for 5 years, and that's really important just in case you are audited. My other key takeaway is communication. I think we need to be clear, we need to be open and honest with your people about where we are, what our plans are, how we're going to get people back to work. But also communicate with your people and ask them what their expectations are. What do they see? How do they see themselves working? If it isn't the plan to open the office 100% of the time. Listen to your people as well. As I've said, everyone's experience has been different. So we need to think about how we can help people adapt and adjust to returning to work, and what support and guidance that we can give. But as well as that, we need to be flexible and agile and adaptable as an organisation as well. And those organisations that have responded quickly to the challenges will fare better. And I think, you know, for some, it might be that there isn't a job for individuals to return to. So again, think about redundancies in terms of detailing and planning and communicating and making sure that we comply with our statutory obligations. And also at this time, it's about balancing the short term against the long term goals. And also take a breath and think about what steps you can take now to support your people, to support your business, to allow for employment growth in the long term. I've been thinking a lot about training recently and about how managers are working. I've been talking to clients about the pressures that they're finding from HR contacts, about how they are trying to support their management population. And I think there's a real challenge, but with challenge comes opportunity, and there's an opportunity to really upskill our leadership and upskill our management population. For those who have never had any employment law training or management training or leadership training, or for those who want to brush up on their skills. And I think there is that opportunity now. And through the HR Training Academy, we're offering managers and leaders in HR the opportunity to attend soft skills courses, leadership courses, but also compliance courses and legal training courses to really support them, but to have that focus on remote management and how we can manage our remote teams. So again, bringing training and topics which are focused on the issues that your leaders and your people and your HR teams are facing now and what they can face in the future. So there are lots of options when it comes to training. We can run online training courses for in person over Zoom, for example, to your management and your people populations. We can provide pre-recorded training as well if you want to upload those for your wider employee populations, training for boards, training for leadership, and training for wider employee populations. So as well as offering that bespoke training in-house, we're also offering managers and HR the opportunity to attend small group interactive sessions that will be that mix between discussion, sharing experiences, but also providing solutions to the situations and the problems and the challenges that you're finding at the moment. So I'm kicking that off with a Managing and Leading Remote Teams course on the 20th of October. It's 90 minutes, but there's opportunities in there to break out, to network as well as best we can do over screen with a mug of tea. So it would be fantastic if people would like to join that. I am keeping numbers small because I feel that it's really important that when you do attend a training course, that you have that opportunity to really learn and ask questions. So they will be small training opportunities there. So managing remote and teams, one on unconscious bias as well. So really excited about bringing that to you as well, and look out for courses on managing stress and resilience as well. But also, you know, our managers are still managing, so we do need to think about our legal compliance courses, and I put some examples up on the slide there around equal opportunities, so avoiding the pitfalls there. We're still recruiting, but how do we onboard people remotely? Some sort of tips and some legal risk areas there. As I've talked there about whistleblowing, grievances, complaints, how are managers going to manage performance? How are we going to manage absence? What are the rules now regarding social media? And, you know, how are we going to manage our people being on remote? And as well as that, you know, looking at redundancy and reorganisations as well. So again, sign up to those courses. I will be running, unfortunately I had to cancel Masterclass 2020, but Masterclass 2021 will be back for those who are new to HR, who want a refresher in employment law. But again, it's a course specifically for HR, so do sign up to receive our invites. And I really hope to see some of you in person as well. You still have the opportunity to attend our free webinars. So again, I really hope that you sign up for those. My plan for the end of the year is to run a case law update webinar in November, because quite frankly, I think we need a bit of light relief. And never have I said case law updates are light relief, but I think at this time it would be quite nice to hear about what has been going on in the tribunal. And then on the 10th of December there, looking at where we are and where we want to be and where we hope to be. You know, where are we looking at in terms of Brexit, in terms of the changes to the immigration rules? So again, a kind of a look back, a look forward, but giving you that opportunity to listen to the types of experiences that we're finding with our clients, with our contacts, and in that wider HR space. So to find out more about us, here are our details. Again, please do sign up for our updates. You can do that via the Boys Turner website. If you've not done so already, then do link in with us, and then you'll be able to see our posts and to receive our online updates as well. So thank you so much for joining me today. And I look forward to seeing you again at our in-person training events, but also at our webinars. Thank you very much indeed.